Darius Johnson had lived on the edge of Millstone County all his life. His grandfather had cleared the land with his own 2 hands after coming back from the war, and his father had kept it safe through years of hardship, droughts, and rising taxes. The land wasn't just soil and trees, it was a legacy, a heartbeat of family history. Sprawling across several hundred acres, it included lush woods, a shimmering creek that wound its way into a man-made lake, and, most importantly, a sturdy dam Darius's father had built with neighbors decades earlier. That dam not only kept their property thriving but also fed into the irrigation systems for the nearby town. Darius had grown up knowing every inch of that land. He knew where the deer passed in the early mornings, where the fish swam in the lake, and which oak trees were older than the county itself. After his parents passed, he became the sole caretaker of the property. But unlike his father, Darius had to deal with a new kind of challenge, people who didn't see the land as heritage but as profit. Developers had been eyeing Millstone for years, and when the suburbs began to spill out from the city, the pressure grew worse. Darius had refused countless offers from real estate companies who wanted to buy portions of his land. Not for sale, he would say each time, his voice calm but firm. But no one took his answer seriously. They assumed a black man living alone on prime land couldn't possibly hold out forever. Then came the HOA, the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. At first, Darius barely noticed their existence. He assumed they were just another neighborhood group down the road. But the HOA wasn't just managing a neighborhood, it was expanding one. Without so much as a conversation, they began construction on the very edges of Darius's property line. What started as trucks clearing dirt soon turned into concrete foundations. Darius was stunned when he realized what was happening. "They're not building that close," he told himself one morning, standing on his porch and staring at the distant rumble of machinery. But within weeks, the skeletons of new homes rose like weeds after rain. The noise was constant, hammers, saws, the beeping of bulldozers reversing. And before long, rows of houses stood where his family's hunting grounds had once been. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe the developers had gotten confused about where the boundary lay. But when he brought out the old maps, he realized the truth. They weren't confused at all, they were trespassing, deliberately and arrogantly. Darius stormed down to the county office, carrying his deeds and surveyor's maps. The clerk barely looked up when he explained. "Sir, if you feel your property has been infringed upon, you'll need to file a formal complaint," the clerk said, sliding a stack of paperwork across the counter. Weeks passed, and his complaint went unanswered. In the meantime, the HOA finished the first phase of construction, 35 houses, identical in design, standing proudly on his land like a taunt. Families began moving in, bringing their shiny cars, manicured lawns, and barking dogs. None of them asked whose land it was, they trusted the HOA, and the HOA trusted that Darius wouldn't fight back. The first real clash came when the HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman named Karen Whitfield, arrived at Darius's property. She came in a crisp suit and carried a clipboard, her eyes scanning his home as though it were an inconvenience on her tour. "Mr. Johnson," she said briskly, "we'll need you to remove some of your fencing. It's an eyesore, and it doesn't comply with the standards of Maple Creek." Darius blinked at her, trying to understand if she was serious. "This is my land. My fence has been here longer than your neighborhood." Karen smiled thinly. "That may be, but this is a community now. You'll need to get with the program. We'll be sending you notices." True to her word, letters began to appear in his mailbox. They accused him of violating community guidelines, of leaving his land unkempt, of not cutting his grass to HOA standards. Darius ignored them at first, but the harassment escalated. Fines appeared on paper, thousands of dollars in penalties for rules he had never agreed to. Neighbors, emboldened by the HOA, started treating him like he was the intruder. Kids ran across his property without permission, their parents waving dismissively when he complained. A man even parked his truck on Darius's driveway, claiming the road was community property now. When Darius told him to move it, the man laughed and said, "Talk to Karen." The breaking point came when Darius received a letter claiming that the HOA was moving to formally absorb his land into the Maple Creek community. They claimed adverse possession rights, saying his land had been unused and therefore subject to reassignment. That night, Darius sat on his porch, staring out at the lake. The moonlight shimmered on the water, calm and patient. He thought of his father, who had worked his whole life to protect this land. He thought of his grandfather, who had carved it from wilderness. And then his eyes drifted to the dam. The dam wasn't just stone and wood, it was the key to everything. It held back the waters that fed into the HOA's precious lawns, their sprinklers, their gardens. Without it, the man-made lake that gave their community its charm would be nothing but a mud pit. For years, they had benefited from what his family had built, without thanks, without acknowledgement. Darius rose slowly, his jaw set. He had filed papers, made complaints, spoken calmly, and waited for justice. None had come. The HOA wanted to play games. Fine, he would show them who really held power over this land. The next morning, while the neighborhood was waking up to its lattes and jogs, Darius walked down to the dam. The air was crisp, the smell of pine heavy around him. He carried his old toolbox, the same one his father had used. The wood of the dam was weathered but sturdy, the locks and valves old but functional. He set down the box and took out the heavy iron wrench. For a moment, he hesitated. Once he turned that valve, there would be no going back. The lake would drain, the lawns would dry, and the HOA's prized homes would no longer sit beside a scenic waterfront but beside a wasteland. But then he remembered Karen's smug smile, the laughter of the man who had parked on his driveway, the endless letters demanding fines. He remembered his father's voice. "This land is yours, Darius. Protect it." His grip tightened on the wrench. With one sharp twist, the valve began to creak open. At first, just a trickle of water escaped, but then the pressure surged, and the flow roared to life. The ground trembled as the lake began to pour out, rushing into the creek, tumbling over rocks and racing downstream. Darius stood tall, watching as the water level dropped inch by inch. From his porch, he could already hear the shouts of confusion from the houses. Sprinklers sputtered, lawns browned, and the perfect reflection of Maple Creek's dream homes in the lake began to fade. For the first time in months, Darius felt something he hadn't felt before: satisfaction. Here's the continuation of your story, expanded into a full scene 2 with about 1,000 words, written in narrative form without headings or holla. Chaos erupted across Maple Creek as the lake drained away. At first, residents thought it was some sort of maintenance glitch, a temporary issue with the water system. But as hours passed, the sparkling blue surface that had been the pride of their neighborhood shrank into muddy shallows. Ducks flapped away, fish floundered in the receding water, and the once pristine waterfront homes were suddenly staring out over a barren stretch of cracked earth. The HOA emergency meeting was called that very evening in the community clubhouse, a gleaming building that had been built right on Darius's land without his consent. Every chair was filled, the air buzzing with outrage. Karen Whitfield, the HOA president, stood at the front of the room, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent lights. She banged her gavel until the room quieted. "Neighbors, we have a situation. Someone has tampered with the dam upstream. That is why the lake has drained. And I think we all know who is responsible." The crowd murmured. Several people turned their heads toward the window, where Darius's property stretched dark and still beyond the glass. "It's that man," Karen declared, her voice sharp. "The one who refuses to cooperate with this community. The one who insists on living outside our standards. He has sabotaged us." A middle-aged man in a golf shirt raised his hand. "But don't he own that land? Ain't that his dam?" Karen's smile was icy. "Ownership is a matter of interpretation. He has been non-compliant, resistant, and hostile. That dam affects our homes, and it is unacceptable for him to weaponize it against us." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Some residents looked uneasy, but most were furious. A woman stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "My son's koi pond is ruined. We paid a premium for a waterfront property. Now we're sitting on a swamp." Another man shouted, "My grass is dying already. Do you know what happens to property values without the lake?" Karen held up her hand for silence. "We will file charges. We will make sure this man pays for what he's done." Meanwhile, Darius sat calmly on his porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. He could hear the angry voices carrying faintly from the clubhouse. He sipped his sweet tea, unbothered. For once, it felt like the balance of power had shifted back to where it belonged. His family had built this land, and he had just reminded everyone of that fact. The next morning, trucks and SUVs began to line up at the edge of his property. Karen led the charge, flanked by several board members and a handful of angry residents. They marched up to Darius's porch as if storming a castle. "Mr. Johnson," Karen said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "We need to have a conversation." Darius set down his mug and leaned back in his chair. "About what? Your people trespassing on my land? Or the houses you built without asking?" Her nostrils flared. "This isn't your land anymore. You've neglected it. You've resisted the community's authority. And now you've endangered hundreds of residents by draining that lake. Darius stood, his tall frame towering over her. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. That lake, that dam, my father built it. My family has kept it running for 70 years. You all enjoyed it for free. You never once said thank you. And now you think you can tell me what to do on my own land. The crowd behind Karen muttered. A few people looked ashamed, but most crossed their arms in defiance. Karen smirked. We'll be filing legal action against you. And if you don't comply, we'll escalate. Darius chuckled, shaking his head. Go ahead, but remember, courts run on paper, and I've got plenty of it. Deeds, titles, maps. You built your houses on my soil. That makes you the trespassers, not me. The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, even Karen had no reply. Then she snapped her fingers, and her entourage turned to leave. This isn't over, she hissed. It certainly wasn't. Over the next week, the HOA bombarded Darius with letters, lawsuits, and threats. Their lawyers filed motions claiming he was interfering with community infrastructure. They demanded he restore the lake immediately, threatening fines that reached into the tens of thousands. But Darius didn't budge. Every time they sent a letter, he filed one back. Every time they claimed authority, he pulled out his family's legal documents that proved ownership. And all the while, the lake remained dry. The grass around the Maple Creek homes turned brown. Patios that once overlooked sparkling waters now stared into a pit of cracked mud. Mosquitoes swarmed the stagnant puddles that remained, buzzing around the residents who had once boasted about waterfront living. The frustration reached a boiling point when one resident, a young father named Eric, came to Darius in secret. He knocked timidly on the porch one evening, hat in hand. Mr. Johnson, he asked quietly. Darius eyed him warily. What do you want? I just wanted to apologize, Eric stammered. We didn't know. They told us this was HOA land. I put my life savings into this house. I wouldn't have done it if I'd known the truth. Darius studied the man's tired eyes, the slump of his shoulders. For the first time, he saw not an enemy but a victim. They lied to you, Darius said simply. And now you see what happens when folks don't respect boundaries. Eric nodded, shame heavy in his voice. Is there any way to fix this? To make peace? Darius sighed, leaning against the porch railing. Peace comes with honesty, but your HOA doesn't want honesty. They want control. Word spread quickly that one of the residents had approached Darius. Karen used it as fuel, whipping up anger at the next HOA meeting. He's dividing us, she shouted. He's trying to turn neighbor against neighbor. Don't fall for it. He wants us weak. But cracks were already forming in her control. The residents couldn't ignore the reality. Their lawns were dying, their property values plummeting, and their dream homes turning into nightmares, all because of a fight with one man who held the key to the water. The sheriff eventually drove out to Darius's place, responding to HOA complaints. He stepped onto the porch with his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. Darius, he said softly, I've known you a long time. But I've got to ask, did you open that dam? Darius met his eyes steadily. Sheriff, this dam's been mine since the day my daddy built it. If I choose to open it, that's my right. The sheriff shifted, clearly torn. He knew the law was on Darius's side, but the pressure from Maple Creek was heavy. They're not going to stop, he warned. I'm not stopping either, Darius replied firmly.